And we will be sharing that after we finish the call as well. So obviously there's been tremendous interest in this topic. We have over 500 people registered for this. By the end of this call, I hope you have a better understanding of whether an emergency rental assistance program is right for your community and how to go about establishing one. As we all know, COVID-19 exposes many inequities around access to healthcare, segregation, and the importance of having a safe, healthy, and affordable home. It is important for us to pursue strategies that will help people who have homes stay in their homes, increase shelter capacity to help others stay safe, and move forward on producing the homes we so greatly need. So today we'll be talking about how communities can create emergency rental assistance programs to help keep people in their homes. Ultimately, we will need to get back to creating new affordable housing, but in this current crisis, local communities are exploring how they can help people in need right now. So CPA and trust funds can be used for direct assistance, so this training will walk you through that. But keep in mind as you do this work that there is an incredible need for more affordable housing in the short and long term. So keep thinking about how you may be able to replenish these funds in the future to continue to prioritize housing production. Before you get started, you're going to want to determine the need in your community, what other resources may be available, such as CDBG and state programs. You can use your local CPA and trust funds to prioritize folks who might otherwise not be eligible for those existing resources or are in the greatest need of help, such as people with extremely low incomes. Some local communities are getting an infusion of CDBG funds, so please coordinate with your city and town. And also explore partnering with United Way or others to fundraise additional funds for these purposes. You should also consult your community housing production plan if you have one, visit MHP's Data Town to get a sense of the housing landscape and demographics in your community. And you can also check out a webinar this afternoon by MAPC on the COVID-19 layoffs housing gap. They also have a report on their site, which is really informative. Please take advantage of the capable network of organizations already doing direct assistance in Massachusetts. As Shelley will describe, it's a best practice to partner with an organization already administering funds in this way. This will allow your program to get up and running quickly and ensure that people are referred to all of the additional assistance they may be eligible for, including rental assistance from the state, food, utility assistance, applying for unemployment benefits, and more. Please don't feel like you have to go it alone. There are great TA providers out there like MHP and others who can assist you in setting up your program. And I also want to note that we are working with our partners at DHCD to create an inventory on local emergency rental assistance programs here in Massachusetts. So stay tuned for more on that so you can learn about what your partners are working on. So today we will first hear an update on the general landscape of emergency rental assistance programs here in Massachusetts. Then we will hear from Eric on the state resources and legislation as it pertains to renters. We'll then hear from Shelley and Stuart on how to use CPA and trust funds for an ERA program, including an overview of MHP's guidance on how to establish a program, which we've shared previously. We will then hear from Jennifer on how she has worked to develop a program at Metro West Collaborative Development, and from Amanda on how Salem is working towards addressing the current needs of their renters. There will be time for questions. As a reminder, please use the chat function just to submit your questions, and please keep yourself muted during the call. I will now hand it over to Shelley from MHP to take it away. Thanks, Shelley.
Thanks, Dana. Good morning, and thanks for joining us today. So just from the incredible response to this, we can all see that this is a hot topic in Massachusetts right now and across the country. Soon after the state directive to stay at home went in place, we started getting calls, and I know that Stuart did at the Community Preservation Coalition as well, asking about creating local rent assistance programs. And so it triggered us engaging with CHAPA and with the CPC to do a little bit more guidance on this. But we are hearing from communities, cities and towns all across the state, from Cape Cod to the Berkshires, all different size communities, and some communities are jumping right in. We have a couple programs that are already distributing funds that are up and running. Most communities are still trying to consider how to move forward and considering parameters and guidelines for their program. And still others are holding off a little bit to get a little bit better sense of the landscape. So wherever you are in the process, you're not behind or ahead, you're where you are. Because we have some communities that feel like that they're behind. You're not behind. There's a lot to consider. So communities are all over the place there, but many are trying to move forward. Really, the message that we've gotten is that folks on the local level are really concerned with what's happening with their neighbors and wanting to do something. And so we appreciate that interest. And I wanted to ask Whitney if she wants to share a little bit about what CHAPA is seeing and hearing with their municipal engagement initiative.
Thanks, Shelley. Yeah, I'll be short and sweet with my remarks, but in our municipal engagement initiative, communities are looking into maybe working with which is really important.
There you go.
In this work. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yep, now we can.
Great. So I was just noting that communities are sort of leaning into the local networks to better understand what the needs are, what the gaps are, as well as working with trusted local community partners to better do the work and to meet the need for community members, and as well as coordinating with the community groups in city and town departments as well. So we're really pleased to see so many of you all leaning in as well on these issues to see what you can do locally and exploring how you can make an impact during this time of need. And so we're happy here at CHAPA to help facilitate calls like this and to facilitate resources to you all in terms of getting that, making the case, continued case for affordable housing, as well as resources to you as you're doing this work. So thank you, Shelley. I'll mirror sort of what you're saying in terms of where folks are at in terms of trying to get this work done and really meet the need. So thank you, and I'll turn it back to, I think Eric is gonna speak next from CHAPA to talk a little bit about what the state resources are for renters and an update on state legislation as it pertains to renters as well. And so again, we're happy to be a resource to you here at CHAPA.
Thanks, Whitney. So again, my name is Eric Shupin. I'm the Director of Public Policy at CHAPA, and I'm going to review some updates that have happened at the state level really within the past few days that have been exciting, and then talk about existing state resources, and then why the work that communities can do on providing support and emergency rental assistance is so important. So for state legislative updates, just on this past Sunday, the governor signed into law some of the strongest protections in the nation for renters and homeowners during the COVID, in response to the COVID emergency. The governor signed into law an eviction and foreclosure moratorium that the legislature had been working on. And for renters, this stops most of the evictions from moving forward in the state. It stops landlords from sending notices to quit or starting the eviction process or filing new cases. It stops courts from scheduling non-emergency cases and moving those cases forward. And it stops sheriffs from levying the executions on eviction to do the actual final step in the eviction process. It halts most of the evictions with some exceptions for emergencies where there's alleged criminal activity or conduct that endangers the health and safety of others. So all those that are related to the non-payment of rent, particularly for those who have lost their income due to COVID, those are the ones that now have a moratorium and are protected. The moratorium, and this is key, the moratorium is just that. It is a delay. It by no means removes any obligation to pay rent, and that rent will come due. The moratorium for now will last for 120 days or up to 45 days after the emergency restriction is, emergency declaration is lifted. With the discretion, the governor has the discretion to extend that moratorium. So because we're proud of this legislation that we were able to pass, but again, we know that it is just the first step. Once this moratorium is lifted, we need to be able to help those residents who have fallen behind on rent or on other household payments like mortgage payments. And that's why resources like those we're discussing today that communities can provide, as well as other state resources, are so important. So right now at the state level, we of course have our traditional rental assistance programs in public housing. That includes the federal Section 8 program and the state's Massachusetts rental voucher program. There's also local housing authorities who manage public housing and administer rental assistance. But even before the crisis, rental assistance and public housing resources were extremely scarce. Getting vouchers and finding an apartment to use it is a years-long process, and the waiting list for public housing is over 100,000 people. So this is not, unfortunately, a short-term solution to the crisis we know we're going to be facing as people struggle to pay their rent. So looking to what programs currently exist at the state level, the best state resource available to renters who have fallen behind on these housing payments is the Residential Assistance for Families in Transition programs, otherwise known as Raft. Raft is a homelessness prevention program for households with very low incomes experiencing a housing crisis. Eligible households can receive up to $4,000 to keep their housing, find new housing, or otherwise avoid becoming homeless. If someone has fallen behind on rent or mortgage payments, Raft can help pay up to 4 months of that back rent or mortgage up to that $4,000 benefit limit. It serves families and individuals, seniors, persons with disabilities, and other vulnerable populations, including undocumented immigrants. Currently, eligibility for Raft is limited to those who earn at or below 50% of the area median income. As an example of what this might mean, this is set by HUD annually, and it's done by region and also based on household size. So for a family of 4 in Boston, that means Raft can serve a family that earns up to about $70,000 a year, or for an individual, up to about $45,000 a year. Comparatively, in Springfield, an eligible 4-person household could earn up to about $43,000 a year, or up to about $30,000 a year for an individual. Raft is administered by regional housing agencies. This is the network of housing agencies, otherwise known as housing consumer education centers, that offer services to every community in Massachusetts. They offer not only Raft, but also housing and foreclosure counseling, other housing search assistance, and is just a great resource for anyone who has questions about housing in Massachusetts. To find the regional housing agency that serves your community, you can visit masshousinginfo.net and look up by municipality which organization you can reach out to. For example, in Boston, Metro Housing Boston serves this region, and in Worcester, RCAP Solutions serves that region. These housing consumer education centers are invaluable partners to both the households and individuals seeking housing resources, as well as to municipalities who are looking for supports and services that they might be able to offer or to find out information about. As your city or town thinks about how you might be able to support a local emergency rental assistance program, I really encourage you to reach out to your regional housing agency to learn about opportunities to work together on developing a program, learning about the needs facing your communities, and building partnerships. Similarly, local housing authorities and community action agencies are also a great resource that you can reach out to learn about existing benefits and to learn about opportunities to collaborate. Now, with Raft is great resources, but there are, of course, limitations. The biggest limitation, of course, is that there is just not nearly enough of it. Before the crisis, for both Raft was a $21 million a year program that the state supported. And each year, even without an emergency crisis like COVID, by the end of the year, it would run out of funding. So that means, it would have $21 million at the start of the year as it gave out those benefits. Once that $20 million was up, the program could no longer be offered. With COVID now, we know that the demand is going to grow really exponentially as that moratorium is lifted, and people are going to need to find a way to pay that back rent that they owe. And if they still have a loss of income or have lost their job, we're going to need more resources for Raft. And that's why CHAPA, along with our partners, we're advocating for the state to provide a $50 million emergency application for Raft. And we hope that all of you will help support us in this ask and reach out to your legislators, your state representatives and state senators to support that emergency allocation for the program. But again, we know that that's not enough, and there are other limitations that Raft has. Currently, there's a $4,000 cap on resources. So once that family hits that $4,000 cap, or that household hits that cap, they can no longer access Raft, and it can be at least a year and sometimes longer for that family or that household to be able to re-access that program. As an example of what that means, if a household had hit an emergency situation, 8 months ago before the COVID crisis and needed to access Raft and were made stable by that, which is great. But if then they lost their job because of COVID, they wouldn't then now be able to re-access that program. Also, I did mention that undocumented immigrants can access this program, but there is still a fear or a worry about what accessing state resources might mean or public benefits might mean for applying for immigration status, and so it's important that there are other resources that might be made available at the local level that these populations might be more comfortable with accessing. And then the other big limitation are the income limits for the Raft program. I said that it serves very low income, or those earning about 50% of the area median income. Well, we know that the need isn't going to be limited to those very low income households, that there are going to be higher income households who need assistance and who have been hurt by the COVID crisis. And so resources controlled at the local level can possibly have greater flexibility to serve incomes, for example, up to 80% of the area median income. That's why I'm so encouraged that there are so many of you joining this call today, because it's great that you're thinking creatively about what resources you have, whether it's CPA funds or municipal affordable housing trusts or other federal dollars that might be coming in that communities control, like the Community Development Block Grant Program. All of these resources can be used to respond to this crisis and support local emergency rental assistance programs. And I look forward to working with you at CHAPA, but with all our partners to help you in your efforts to do that. So that was my update, and I'll turn it back over to Dana.
Thanks, Sarah. We're actually going to switch to Stuart Saganor of the Community Preservation Coalition. Stuart.
Yeah, thanks, Shelley. Hello, everybody, and thanks so much for spending a little time with us today. So a lot of you listening to this talk today have CPA in your communities. In fact, CPA is in 176 communities in the Commonwealth, which is exactly half the number of cities and towns that we have. CPA actually was not designed as an emergency program. It's actually quite the opposite. It's a program that's designed for long-term quality of life capital needs. But it is also a housing program. While the legislature envisioned it as something to create affordable housing and production, they had the foresight to amend the law in 2012 to clarify that rental assistance is absolutely an allowable use of CPA funds. And CPA is pretty flexible in this regard, too. There really aren't many rules that govern that. The rules would come from other programs, which we'll hear about on this call today. CPA does go up to 100% of area-wide median income. So whereas you just heard Eric talk about Raft being limited to 50%, CPA can help a higher need. So it's anywhere from very low income all the way up to 100%. And like all CPA appropriations, however, it does require a recommendation from your local community preservation committee and also a vote by the legislative body to appropriate the money. So the legislative body would be a town, in a town it would be town meeting, obviously, and in a city it would be the city council or the town council. But it is still possible to get this done, most definitely. Most community preservation committees are still meeting, and they're meeting remotely every week. So there is provisions in most of those application processes for late applications. Most CPCs, I think, have gone through the process already for recommending what they're going to do this year. But there are lots of requests coming in for rental assistance, and we're seeing CPCs react to that by meeting and amending their proposals or adding to it. And in fact, town meetings are being delayed all across the Commonwealth. So there is still time to get on most town meetings. We're hearing about town meetings reopening their warrant to change what they have proposed for town meeting because they still have extra time now that most town meetings have been proposed. Cities, of course, can respond much more quickly. City councils can meet much more often and more quickly than town meetings. Although these timing issues do present a little bit of hurdles, as Shelley said earlier, we have seen some communities already go all the way through the process, call a meeting of their community preservation committee remotely, receive a proposal from a qualified agency to run the program, and then appropriate the money. And some of them have been fairly large. 1.25 million was appropriated in Chelsea, or recommended by the CPC, and is now in front of the City Council for action later this month. Waltham appropriated $1 million already for rental assistance, and we're seeing a lot of other communities as well. One thing to remember is that the need for rental assistance is probably going to be with us for quite a while. You heard Eric talk about the fact that there may be a second wave of need when this emergency eviction moratorium expires in 120 days, or maybe even sooner if the state of emergency is lifted. So many tenants are going to have back rent due at that time, and there's no issue whatsoever of using CPA funds for that back rent. So after many other sources have been used in the interim, CPA may be really helpful down the line when you've had a chance to go through that local process, and can be accessed when the eviction moratorium expires. One thing to remember is that CPA is a housing program. It is not a social services program. So funds can't be used for things like assistance with utilities, food, heating oil. We're going to have to turn to other sources for things like that. CPA is really specifically for the housing costs that an individual incurs on a monthly basis through their rent. And lastly, rental assistance, as Shelley said, is specifically listed as an allowable use in the CPA legislation as it was amended. But the case for mortgage assistance is a bit more complicated. If a home is deed restricted already for affordable residents, then mortgage assistance is likely to be fine. But a mortgage assistance on an unrestricted home is really problematic. The residents of that home may be income eligible, but the house is market rate and can be sold at a considerable profit. In Massachusetts, housing prices, as we know, unfortunately rise pretty fast, and CPA funds can't be used for market rate housing. So if you are looking to expand use of CPA funds beyond rental assistance, you really want to be careful and consult municipal council on that. We do have probably lots of municipal officials on the call today. Unfortunately, CPA funds cannot pay for your staff time. There is a provision in CPA called the no supplanting provision, where it can't pay for things that are already in the city's budget. But if you're appropriating funds to a third-party agency, a CDC, or any of the other organizations that already exist to do rental assistance, certainly there might be some administrative costs there that would be fine, as long as those folks aren't municipal employees. So we're here at the Coalition to help with any questions on this, and certainly your local CPC, your local Community Preservation Committee is active, they're working, and we encourage you to talk to them about doing it, because CPA can be really helpful in the situation. So back to Shelley, I think.
Thank you. Thanks, Stuart. So I just wanted to say a couple things. That many of our communities, over 100 in Massachusetts, also have an affordable housing trust fund. And if your trust already has funds in it, then you can be using those funds for rent assistance. If you have CPA funds in your affordable housing trust, you just need to make sure that the CPA funds were transferred without restrictions about how that's used, to make sure that they are available for rent assistance. But a housing trust in some communities where they may have to wait for town meeting to be able to receive CPA funds, if your trust already has some funds, the trust could potentially start funding a program earlier before town meeting. So those are some important state and local resources that are available. We're going to take some time to look at questions that have been coming in. So Dana and Whitney have been monitoring that, and they're going to bring some questions forward for us.
Okay, great. Thank you to everyone who's spoken so far. Let's start with some questions for Eric on the Raft program and stuff at the state. And some of these have been being answered in the chat, but for those of you on the phone, I just want to make sure that Eric answers these as well. So there is an effort to change this for the statutory change to waive the bar for repeat Raft assistance for those who have received the max Raft assistance within the past 12 months or 24 months for subsidized renters. Can you share more on that, Eric?
That is something I think Stephanie from the Regional Housing Network of Massachusetts shared about. And if Stephanie is on this call, I would actually ask her to provide more information on that if she's able to.
Sure. Stephanie, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Hi, everybody. So two pieces. One is that DHCD just recently lifted the requirement about accessing, not being able to access more than once in a 12-month period. I included that, a direct quote from the DHCD contact person in an email in the chat box. And then the second piece is that we are also pursuing, as Eric mentioned, additional funding that would include legislative language that would also increase the cap of the amount that folks would be able to access in a 12-month period. So right now it's capped at 4,000. We're seeking increasing that to 10,000. And so I'm happy to inform anyone who has any specific questions about Raft and how it works, and just also would just encourage everyone to look at that program as a great starting point and try to layer on any new programs that you do to sort of fill those gaps and coordinate as much as possible with your local regional administrating agency. Thanks.
Great. And then a couple of additional questions, Eric, just on clarity about what homeowners can get mortgage assistance. So people have been asking if Raft can be used for mortgage assistance as well. Can you just clarify that, and who in particular can get that assistance, and whether there's any limit on that as well?
Mortgage assistance can be used just like Raft can pay for rent arrears, so up to 4 months of back rent. For those who have fallen behind on mortgage payments and meet the other eligibility requirements, they could access up to 4 months to help them pay their mortgage payments that they owe. So it's the same process as it would be to access the program for rent arrears.
Okay, thank you very much. And then a question about requiring a social security number for Raft. Can you speak about what's required for that?
So it's my understanding that there is not a requirement to have a social security number to access Raft. Raft, there may be a question on the application that asks for a social security number, although it's not required that it be provided.
Okay, thank you very much. So now I've got some questions for Stuart and Shelley. A lot of questions about whether CPA funds can or should be restricted to residents only, and whether there are any fair housing implications for how you make your restrictions.
That's definitely a question for MHP, who I always refer to as our fair housing experts.
Well, so if you're using CPA funds, the funds don't have to be spent in your community. They can be spent in other parts of the Commonwealth. So it's not that there's a requirement, at least with CPA. I can't imagine that there are very many funding sources that would say it has to be within your community. In this kind of a situation where it's an emergency rent assistance program, where it really is about helping to stabilize folks right now, it's not as much about helping people move to other communities. We're not saying definitively, but it's because of the nature of it. If you are focusing on an existing residence, it seems as if it's less of a concern, given that it's a short-term program and the nature of the program. When we're doing long-term rent assistance and we're saying you have to already live in the community or have been in the community for a while, that goes against, that may go against fair housing and other laws in place. However, this is not an expert opinion, and you may want to consult your town council or your solicitor. But given the nature and that it's short-term, restricting it to existing residents may actually make sense in this moment. It's not at all a requirement.
Okay, and it's hearing a lot of people are saying there's concerns in their community that the money, not necessarily people who are on this call, but they're hearing concerns when it's coming up in their community that the money will be used to go outside of the community rather than helping people inside the community. So again, I think your answer addresses that, but it's something for communities to be thinking about.
Yeah, and at the same time, people say that all the time. They say they only want people in the community to be able to access new affordable housing units. And that's not we have fair housing for a reason, that we're trying to create an open and fair housing market. So it's a longer term concern if that gets brought up a lot in your community, but in this moment, it may be appropriate to focus on people already in your community.
One thing is that many low-income populations are being left out of the economic relief that's coming. Maybe this hasn't arrived, or they'll face barriers in accessing those funds. Should communities be carving out a portion of funds to say, as an example, no less than a percentage of funds will go to people at or below 30% of AMI? Is that something folks can do?
So folks can do that, and there are communities that are looking at that are holding a portion aside for very low income. Okay. And that would be a reflection of needs, so that could be appropriate.
Do students qualify for funds?
That's a great question. I know in some programs that they don't.
Okay.
I don't know if Laura Schufelt might be on the call, and if she wants to unmute herself, she can, from MHP. I don't, Stuart, there wouldn't be a restriction like that with CPA funds. So I know that there are some funding sources that do restrict that, but I don't know if you would need to with a funding source like CPA.
Yeah, CPA has definitely no restrictions. It doesn't get that detailed in terms of who can use the money. And it actually even says in the law, back to our last question, it says that CPA funds can be expended in any city or town in the Commonwealth. So we haven't seen a lot of that, but we have seen some. Particularly on the Cape, a lot of communities are on the Vineyard. A lot of communities have gotten together and pooled their CPA money to do regional programs. So we definitely have seen CPA money leave the community. CPA goes through a process, at the Community Preservation Committee and at town meeting. So there's plenty of opportunity for folks to weigh in and decide what they want to do with the funding. But it is possible for CPA to go anywhere, and there are no restrictions other than the income restrictions up to 100% that would eliminate students or any other group like that.
Okay. There had been some questions about whether assistance can be provided for mortgage assistance or loan assistance. I think Eric spoke to that Raft can. Is that the same for CPA and trust funds as well?
So you said mortgage assistance?
Yes.
Yeah, so Stuart had touched on that with mortgage assistance with CPA, that if units are deed restricted, if they qualify as community housing under CPA, then that may be appropriate. But for units that are market rate and do not have a restriction and do not qualify as community housing, that CPA is not allowed to be used on market rate housing. So that's problematic.
Okay. And there is a comment in the chat about there is protection for homeowners right now. So homeowners should be contacting their bank or servicer, ask for forbearance or a deferment. There's state legislation requiring mortgage servicers to offer up to 6 months of forbearance. So for homeowners, that's a resource that they can access.
And I just want to say, for
sure.
affordable housing trust, it's similar to CPA. The purpose of an affordable housing trust, at least if it's organized under the Municipal Affordable Housing Trust statute, the purpose is to create and preserve affordable low and moderate income housing, or housing for low and moderate income households. So it's a similar purpose as CPA.
How can these funds be used to pay for common area fees or condo fees when you're speaking about how the funds can be used?
I think that depends upon the funding source. I can only speak to CPA, and as we discussed earlier, CPA funds are limited to the monthly housing rental costs. It's not a social services program or can't pay any ancillary costs like that. Okay. So the answer would be no for CPA. I don't know about other programs.
Eric, do you know about if Raft can be used for those fees?
I'm sorry, which fees?
Condo fees or common area fees for deed restricted units.
Yeah, I really don't know for sure. Sorry, whether they can be used for those kinds of expenses.
Okay. And I have a question about timing and determining need. Should what would be the recommendation for timing? So should folks hold off until there's employment received, until the moratorium is lifted? Should communities get started right away? And also, there's questions about the responsibility of the municipality to ensure that the money is used for housing. So does it have to be paid directly to the landlord? How do they demonstrate need that it will be used for rent in particular?
So I'm actually going to get into a lot of that in the next section. If
Okay.
there are other questions that are more specifically around some of the existing resources and programs.
Okay.
Funding sources.
One last question for you is, how are community preservation coalitions engaging with people with lived experience to ensure that they are part of the decision-making process? I know that some communities are trying to move quickly. How are folks, how would you recommend folks engage with their community to determine need?
So I'm going to suggest a variety of things as well. I think that some communities are probably a little bit more, some CPCs are probably a bit more engaged with different housing agencies and social service agencies that are working directly with low and moderate income households in the community. Some are probably more engaged than others. I think that when we are considering using public resources for low and moderate income households, that it's a good idea for CPCs to be listening to the needs in the community. So some of that is through housing needs analysis and different plans that the local community is using. And some of that could be directly reaching out to different organizations and agencies in the community or that work in the community. And I just think that some are probably more connected than others, and it may also be related to some of our communities just have much more housing support infrastructure than other communities. But I'll get a little bit more into some of the ways to consider your local need.
Okay, so let's maybe move on to the next section, and we'll keep the questions coming.
So the next section is me. I'm just going to go a little bit over the rental assistance guidance that MHP has put together in the last few weeks. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. I'm going to pull out kind of some highlights because we've distributed this pretty widely, and I think that Dana might have sent links or will send links after this, and it's on MHP's website for sure. But first is when you're considering a program is to consider your potential funding sources and then any kind of restrictions around those funding sources. So Stuart talked about some with CPA, and then if you have CDBG funds, there are different restrictions. Some communities are wanting to use a variety of resources to address rental assistance needs right now. And you just want to be reminded that different funding sources have different restrictions. So you may want to keep those funding sources separate so you can draw on them differently. And again, just the reminder that in communities that have the Community Preservation Act, but that are towns and have town meeting, it may not be an immediate source of funds, but if the town had access to other sources in the interim, if you wanted to get started right away, you could do that in hopes that CPA funds would be allocated with town meeting. And but a big thing when you think about funding and how much funding you need is to try to determine need in your community. And that's really a challenge right now because things are changing on such a daily basis. When we generally create rent assistance programs that are longer term, we're looking at more static data about the housing cost burden in our community and the percentage of households that are spending over 30 or 50% of their gross income on housing, but it's more static data. So it's difficult at this point. So some suggestions are to have conversations with your regional housing agency, your RHA, to see that is already distributing Raft in your area, the Raft program in your area, and just to get a sense of what is the agency seeing in terms of need and where are potential gaps that they're identifying. You can also reach out to your local housing authority and other housing organizations in your area to also get their sense of where are they seeing gaps, who's not able to access existing programs, or where there's just not enough resources. You can talk to landlords in your community, particularly those that may have affordable housing units, just to get a sense of what percentage of their tenants do they think may end up having a difficult time covering their costs. You can consider some of the unemployment data. So Eric or Dana brought up MAPC's work that they're starting to do of really analyzing unemployment data in Massachusetts. And that is apparently not at this point on the local, down to the local level, but you can get a sense of the industries that are particularly hard hit, that are laying off high numbers of people. And then you can consider, you can look at census data using our website Datatown to look at which industries do your residents work in, and to see if you have a significant number of residents that are in the industries that are particularly hard hit. These are just a variety of ways that you can get a sense of what the need may be in your community when you consider what size of program you might need. We do suggest that you also take into mind unemployment and Raft, that these are existing resources that, you know, try not to do the best you can to not duplicate other sources. Some people will receive unemployment. They might also receive the additional $600 a week. That might be enough for them to cover their rent. We want to encourage people to continue paying their rent if they can, and try to, the best you can, determine where there may be gaps in your community, in your region, so that we're not duplicating resources. Secondly, it's a very confusing time. Your guidelines, the guidelines for your program should not be confusing. They should be clear. Because these are publicly funded programs, they should be well advertised, not just through local agencies, because not everyone with need is necessarily connected to a local organization or agency, but also perhaps on the town or city website in a variety of places. Don't make it hard for people to know that these resources are available. Applications should be online or be able to be submitted electronically, just given that we're in a pandemic. And some communities are looking at first come, first serve. Others are looking at lotteries. I just want to point out that if you're paying attention to how some of the federal resources with the SBA were distributed, the PPP through a first come, first serve system, it appears to have been pretty unfair. First come, first serve can be, sometimes it can be unfair. A lottery sometimes can be more fair, even though it may be a bit more work. But be thoughtful about how you actually distribute your resources. Be clear if it's a temporary program and how long the program will last, how long you expect to fund the program. Some communities are looking at a short-term program, say a 90-day program, because we just don't know what things are going to look like in a few months. And that gives you the option to perhaps do a 2.0 to modify the guidelines to change the program a little bit if that seems appropriate. It's standard to pay the landlord and not the tenant, but this generally requires collecting a W-9 from the landlord and then releasing 1099s at the end of the fiscal year. And then when we are distributing public resources for a non-governmental entity, a private entity, if we are working with, when we're working with nonprofits or when we're distributing resources to individuals, the state's anti-aid amendment comes into play, which says that public resources cannot be used for a private purpose. There needs to be a public benefit from this allocation. And so the Department of Revenue has given direction around CPA, using CPA resources, of having clear grant agreements, clarifying what the resources are to be used for, the timeline to use them. And this can be appropriate guidance for any municipal funds that are being allocated for a private purpose. But the idea is that there's a public benefit. And that leads me to procurement, that in this session today, we're not going to get into procurement. We're not going to advise on procurement. We're not experts in that. There is some disagreement about whether using municipal funds for a rental assistance program, whether you need to procure that or not. I did call the IG's 30B hotline yesterday to try to get a response today, or to just get some feedback for you about how the IG's office may weigh in on this. And unfortunately, as I was prepping quietly this morning, a call came in on my cell phone that was private, and I didn't answer it, thinking it was probably junk, and it ended up being the IG's office. So even in this time, they are incredibly responsive. So I will try to get to him later today. And after this training, we will look at all of your questions, and we'll release some additional responses to your questions, and also some thoughts from the IG's office. But if you are implementing a local program, we do suggest that you talk to your town council or solicitor, your chief procurement officer, that you consider procurement and Chapter 30B in your decisions whenever you're using public funds to support a program, housing program. And then lastly, we're encouraging communities that, given that this is an emergency time, we want this to be done well. We're using public resources. We would urge you to partner with local organizations, housing agencies, a regional housing agency, an entity that already has some experience in managing housing programs in income qualifying households, that understand, that have experience working with low and moderate income households, that you don't necessarily do this in-house unless you really have the capacity. So a city like Waltham, their housing division has some capacity, they're running it internally. In most of the communities that we're speaking with, they are engaging with other groups, and we would encourage you to consider the same. Thank you. We're gonna get into, we've asked Jennifer Van Kampen from the Metro West Collaborative Development nonprofit organization, a CDC in the Metro West area, to share a little bit about a program that she has been helping to develop with some of the communities in her catchment area. Jennifer, are you here?
I'm going to get on my phone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you, Jennifer.
Awesome. So this has only taken me 2 computers, 2 phones, and it's too early. It's not 5 o'clock yet. Sorry, gang. Hold on. There we go. Okay. So Metro West Collaborative Development does run lotteries and conducts income eligibility determinations for our own properties, our own affordable housing properties, but also affordable housing developments throughout Eastern Massachusetts. And so we knew pretty quickly that this would be something of interest out there in the world of especially the smaller communities that might have a need, but not really the capacity to implement a program. So we did get, we got in contact with a few towns who were eager to begin, and we realized very quickly that we were not going to be able to administer 12 or 15 different programs. So we pitched the idea of, how about if we develop one program that people could participate in. So we started with sort of existing traditional affordable housing application processes and existing eligibility determination processes. And we endeavored to really, really simplify and streamline those processes. We ran that idea by our good friends at MHP, who gave it somewhat their blessing. And then we have been workshopping it via Zoom over the last week or so with a number of communities who are interested. So I do feel like the program guidelines and the application process that we have cobbled together meets a lot of the needs and interests of at least the municipalities that have participated so far. It might not meet everybody's need. And, you know, with any affordable housing development or any affordable housing program, there are always people who are dissatisfied on both ends of the spectrum. It's, so, you know, we can't create a perfect thing here. So where are we now? I think many of you may have seen, we have shared our program guidelines, our program application, and our program agreement. They were sent out by CHAPA. You are welcome to use those and amend them, do whatever you want to with them. We are also happy to speak with folks individually if you have specific questions about those. We focused, though, in our program design on a couple of things. We really wanted the application process to be easy. People right now, or before now, people had limited, low-income people had limited access to printers and computers and scanners. A lot of low-income people have to do these applications on their phones, and it's very, very burdensome under best-case scenarios. So we wanted to try to really simplify and streamline. Another important decision was that eligibility, who can participate, is going to be based on the information provided today. Now, that's hard for some people because they want to ask, well, what about tomorrow? What will your income be tomorrow? Or what was your income last month? None of that matters, in my humble opinion. What matters is, what is people's income today? So we're going to be asking people, do you have wages? Yes or no? Do you receive unemployment? Yes or no? Do you receive Social Security? Yes or no? And to any yes question, then they just have to provide some backup documentation that shows that. The other critical path in terms of eligibility is that households must have suffered some income loss. So they're going to need to provide sort of a pre-COVID wage and a post-COVID wage. So that might be two different pay stubs. It might be an unemployment notice, a layoff. It might just be a hand scribbled sheet from a landlord, from an employer. It says this person has lost their job, or we've laid them off, or reduced their hours, etc. We're going to base our assistance on bedroom size, so of the unit, not on household size and not on any complex formulas around need. And I warn everyone, the whole question of need is a little bit abstract, and it is a bottomless rabbit hole. You will never come up with a satisfactory definition of need. Everybody is in need right now. So if you have a one-bedroom apartment, you get X numbers of dollars. If you have a two-bedroom apartment, you get X numbers of dollars. It also will help reduce human error on the part of whoever the administrator is. If the administrator is having to analyze incomes and set different numbers of grant assistance, then you just introduce the possibility of more human error. We're going to do 3 months because that does feel like it's kind of an emergency response. These sort of streamlined procedures seem appropriate for an emergency response. And I think, as Shelley said earlier, if after 3 months folks want to continue, you have the opportunity to kind of make adjustments to the program then. Another key eligibility decision we've made is to exclude households living in public housing with a Section 8 certificate, an MRVP, or other rental assistance, or are current active recipients of Raft. So to that point earlier about, if you got Raft 8 months ago, you would be eligible for our rental assistance program now. But theoretically, and I'm sure there are people on this call who could argue differently, but theoretically, if you're a resident of public housing or a recipient of Section 8, those funding sources should be helping to make you whole, and you shouldn't need this rental assistance. We are restricting it to households in the locality, so there must be evidence of a lease, or it can be an email from a landlord, something verifying that the household does have occupancy in that municipality. We will have a landlord agreement that is signed by both the tenant and the landlord to kind of affirm each other's stories. We're charging an administrative fee. Whoever you're working with is going to need to get paid to do this. And I think that's fair and reasonable. And just maybe lastly, don't overthink this. It's 3 months of support. It's $5,000, maybe $10,000 per household. I have very, very strong feelings on this subject, which I will not subject you all to, but I think, you know, the key or the beauty of this is that you're going to be supporting tenants, relieving them from a tremendous amount of stress they are under right now, supporting landlords who are also having trouble making ends meet in some cases, and just getting money out there into our economy, which is obviously an important thing right now. Last but not least, where we're at in our process, we would expect to enter into either sort of letters of intent or actual contract agreements with interested municipalities. We will need the money up front. So if anybody's thinking about sort of how this actually rolls out, I don't have the money to be able to write 10 $5,000 checks on behalf of your municipality. So we'll need the money up front, which does require, I know, some nuances with finance departments. We will be collecting W-9s from landlords, and we will be issuing 1099s come January next year. So those are just some of the sort of back-end administrative issues that have to be dealt with. In order for us to move this along, we're actually going to be building out a website page. We've purchased a membership in DocuSign, and we have 3 staff who are kind of ready to work full-time on this. So it's not a small bar to be getting up and over. Last but not least, sorry, one more thing. All of these programs are going to be handling people's personal information, which is protected by state law. So you really have to think about whoever is administering this has the capacity to keep that information safe. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. And just a couple things to point out that if you are going to be working with an agency, a nonprofit organization, that allowing for an administrative fee is completely appropriate and what you should allow for that. And CPA funds can be used to pay for the administrative costs for the program that's being funded with CPA funds, just as a side note. And secondly, to maybe balance Jennifer just a little bit, that you are using public resources. So yes, we're in an emergency and it's an emergency program. We want to get them up and running in most cases quickly. At the same time, they are municipal funds. So you do need to be, have some oversight. And in some cases, it may be in your contract having some language just around if someone misrepresented their income, or that there may be some way, or at least language, that the funds would be expected to be repaid to the program if someone misrepresented their situation. Anyways, we're gonna transition now to Salem and to Amanda, who is gonna share a little bit about how Salem has been considering the needs in the city and how they're moving forward with some rental assistance. Amanda?
Hi, thank you for having me. So in Salem, we're in the process of setting up an emergency rental program. It's not quite ready yet. We're working on those final details. But I'm going to walk through the process that we've gone through thus far. Before COVID, Salem has regularly allocated resources to social service agencies who assist with rent in various ways. That's included rental down payment assistance, tenant-based rental assistance programs, and a Housing First program that helps formerly homeless individuals find apartments and maintain their rent. The city doesn't implement any of these programs. We kick in funds, home funds and that sort of thing, and partner with social service agencies who are experts in providing those kind of programs, such as the North Shore Community Action Program, or NASCAP, Citizens In, Salvation Army, those kind of programs. So when we first started looking into an emergency rental program, we figured it would be best to partner with an agency who knows how to manage that kind of assistance. So, as Jennifer mentioned, it's a lot of admin is going to involve reviewing hundreds, if not thousands of applications, verifying income documentation, managing grant agreements, probably setting up waiting lists, and so on. So to that end, we were really thrilled that NASCAP has agreed to partner with us and implement the program. And we settled that early on. Now, when I say early on, I mean about 2 weeks ago, which feels like forever ago now. And because we just wouldn't have the capacity to manage the program on our own. So then the next step was figuring out what the needs are and how to pay for the program, how to fund it, because we don't want to duplicate an existing program. The idea is to fill in the gaps. So we reached out to our contacts who work directly with constituents in the city. And frankly, some of our contacts have already reached out to us before we even started looking into a rental program, because there are people, you know, at the Council on Aging and the Veterans Agent and the schools who are getting a lot of calls from people who are looking for assistance. So that sort of put us in motion for this program. So the first question we asked was, well, who is calling? Who is seeking assistance? What is their occupation or background? Because from there we can sort of guesstimate what their AMI is and where that need is based on occupation. And then also ask, have those people who are asking for assistance already applied for other resources? Have they applied for Raft or utility assistance and that sort of thing? And if they have not, our response first is, okay, go apply for these resources. They're out there, give them the information, make sure they know about it. And if they have applied elsewhere, such as Raft, why are they also looking for assistance here? Is there an issue with eligibility? Is that a gap we need to fill? Is it an issue with them not receiving enough funding? Maybe that's the gap. And so it's just, again, trying to figure out the need and fill in those gaps. We also sent out a survey to agencies in the city that people go to for assistance. So again, the Council on Aging, our Latino Affairs Coordinator, LifeBridge is our shelter in Salem, Salvation Army, the YMCA, the police chief, the CDC, the Housing Authority, the Disability Resource Center. There are just a whole bunch of people, but it was also a finite group of people we know that folks go to for assistance. So in that survey, we noted that the priority assistance areas we're hearing appear to be emergency homelessness prevention, AKA rental assistance, utility payments, along with, you know, grocery delivery and meal delivery. Those are the things that we're hearing are the needs. So we want to verify that. We ask them if those are the right priorities, how to weigh them, and what the target population should be. And so we took that to frame our program, that information. Now, in terms of local need, we do have a lot of data. We're in the process of going through our consolidated plan. We've also worked with MAPC a lot in the past couple of years on drilling down on housing data in Salem. And so we know that about half of the renters in Salem are housing cost burdened. And that makes sense because a typical bedroom in Salem, a typical 2-bedroom apartment in Salem is about $1,800 a month. But the median rent, the median income for a renter is $37,000. That's a really big gap. And that was before COVID. And so this pandemic has just amplified the housing crisis that we all know exists. So we asked how much rent is needed. Is it a portion of the rent or the full rent? But that question wasn't really helpful because we're never going to be able to pay the full rent, never mind multiple months rents. We just don't have that money or that funding available. And that gets into funding sources. So we needed funding that's available ASAP for the program. And the fastest money is going to be unprogrammed funds. But we typically don't have those. We program all our funding. The City Council has recently voted to allocate funds towards COVID relief efforts. And it was a really broad bucket funding for COVID relief. And so I asked for a little bit of that funding for this program. We also had a little bit of home funds that were not contracted yet. So we pulled those two resources together and have called it round one of funding, just to get something rolling. Since we're putting home money in, that means that it's going to be limited to households who do not earn more than 50% of the area median income. But in round 2 and round 3, we could adjust that. So we're planning on getting 2 more rounds of funding. Each round is based on when the funds will be available. The second round we're looking at will be the CDBG CARES money. Salem is an entitlement community. And the third round we're hoping to get is CPA. And again, as Stuart mentioned, that has to be approved. So that's if it's approved. And even if CPA money is approved, our money would not be available until July. So for rounds 2 and 3, the thought right now is that we would up the area median income to 80%. But again, it'll be based on need. Now, all of those funding buckets are also funding a lot of other really important programs. So for example, at CDBG CARES, we're also looking at creating a small business loan program and putting out an RFP for social service agencies who could provide efforts towards food security and other really essential services right now. So we can't gobble up all the funds with this one program. We're just trying to get a little bit from each program to make something meaningful here. So with that, the amount we think we can pull together, all these different sources, frame the program in this way. It will be for households who have a demonstrated gap between household income before COVID-19 and now. They have to fall into one of several categories for their work situation. So it could be hourly workers, restaurant workers, retail workers. We know they already earn less than what it takes to be able to afford an apartment in Salem. Workers who have been furloughed or laid off, or who have a reduction in hours. Again, regardless of the category that they fall in, they have to have that demonstrated gap of the income before and after COVID, because this is short term, and when the pandemic is over, we want to make sure they can get back into their rental apartment without needing long-term payments. So the program is slated to offer $500 a month for 2 months. And it's not a lot, it's a $1,000 maximum. It's a rolling application until the funds are depleted in each round. Well, obviously $500 is not going to cover all of the rent. For most households, it will not even cover half of the rent. So a key requirement of our program, and this really came from the guidance of MHP, so thank you, Shelley, for it, is that the applicant has to request a reduction in rent from their landlord. They don't have to receive that reduction, but they have to ask for it, because the city's kicking in public funds here and the household is clearly struggling. And so we're all in this together, and it's trying to work with the landlord. If they can come down with a crew cut a little bit, we can kick in some money. The hope is that the tenant can float through this crisis. So, that's the framework. That's how we got to it. I'm in the final stages of finishing the program guidelines and application, getting it translated, and then, being able to push go on advertising the program. So you all got a sneak peek of it. We haven't started advertising yet because we just need to polish it off. But that sums up where Salem is, and I'm happy to answer questions, but I'll turn it over to Dana.
So I actually wanted to jump in just to draw out that one thing that Amanda brought up that I actually meant to reference in trying to consider your local need is looking at your pre-COVID housing cost burden, the percentage of households that were housing cost burdened. And there's a resource, our Data Town website, you can look up your community and you can see how burdened renters were before this, and just know that they're just going to be even more so today. So that was a good thing that I appreciated Amanda bringing that up as part of their process. So we're gonna spend several minutes now, the rest of the time, with addressing some of your questions. So again, Dana and Whitney are monitoring that.
All right, and if all of the speakers could unmute yourselves, that way we'll just be able to more easily go back and forth answering the questions, because some of you will be able to answer these and some will be directed at specific ones of you. And Jennifer, if you're on the phone, you can unmute yourself by hitting *6, please. So one question that came up a couple times is a landlord agreement with the provider enough, or does there need to be a lease? Is a lease required, or can you just have a landlord agreement to show that they need the assistance?
We're hoping to have both. A lease if it's possible, or some other landlord verification, or even just canceled checks or some kind of evidence that that's the rent and to whom it's going. We also are going to have an agreement with the landlord.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. At what point is income eligibility determined? I think you guys spoke about this, but it's for people who have lost a higher paying job, their area median income or their income may have dropped. At what time frame are you using? You guys both spoke to this, but Shelley, is it really just point in time right now we're asking people?
So that is what, it can depend on the community, how your individual community wants to set it up. But as Jennifer spoke to, because this is about responding to the COVID crisis of the pandemic, then it seems as if looking at the income right now makes sense. Communities may disagree a little bit on that.
Okay. Let's see. Focus has been on the income of people, but what about assets? Some renters who have virtually no assets might have a greater need than households with savings. How are you guys addressing that, or is that addressed in these programs?
For Salem's program, our administrator will go through assets as well to determine that, and particularly because we're using home funding in the first round, and that has a lot more requirements and income eligibility and verifying that and determining assets, and so we will be looking through them as well.
So we are trying hard not to look very much at assets. Assets are also hard to verify, especially when people can't get copies of documents and 800 numbers are clogged. So we are going to look at most recent bank statements, but primarily we've asked for those to identify other income that might be unreported. So are there any regular deposits coming in? So that's our recommendation thus far, is that most low-income people don't have a lot of assets, and you can spend a lot of time trying to verify assets.
So some communities may be allowing more income self-certifying than what might be allowed in a longer-term program, just given that it's shorter term, and then perhaps putting some language in the contract that to that nature of acknowledging the self-certifying, and if other income is learned by the program administrator, that then the resources would be expected to be returned or something along those lines. But just given that it's an emergency program, some communities may allow a bit more income certifying, self-certifying than we may do in a longer term program.
Thank you. Question, I think maybe for Eric. What requirement does the moratorium that just passed have for tenants to notify their landlord if they can't pay their rent? Do they have to notify in any way, or is this extended to anyone and everyone without notification?
There is no obligation to notify your landlord. If there are provisions within the moratorium legislation that if a tenant has fallen behind on rent because of COVID-19, then the landlord can't charge late fees or do reporting to a credit bureau with negative credit reporting. And in those cases where a tenant is asking to not have the late fees, they would need to verify to the landlord that that was related to COVID-19. So that's the circumstance where there is that requirement to notify the landlord. Otherwise, if a tenant can't pay rent, there isn't an obligation on the tenant side for them to say, I can't pay rent, this month because of COVID-19.
Thank you. Jennifer, can you clarify the role that Raft plays in your program? And also, can you talk about the communities that are interested in participating? How many are working with you?
Sure. So I think I'm glad Shelley brought up the self-certification, because so far a lot of the programs that have rolled out do rely heavily on sort of one sentence in the certification that says, I attest that I have no other resources that I can use to pay my rent, right? So what we'll be asking in our application is, are you receiving Raft, yes or no? And if the answer is yes, then they are presumably not eligible to participate currently in our program. If the answer is no, or yes, I participated in Raft 6 months ago, but my money's all run out, then they are eligible for our program. So I hope that clarifies that part. Let's see. So it's unclear, as I'm sure many of you on the call know, it's unclear sort of how quickly any CPA funds will be eligible or be able to get moving through your system. So we are probably talking to 6 or 7 towns that are actively trying to figure out how to make this happen. I'm not sure if there's anybody from the city of Newton on the call. I will disclose that they are probably the most likely to be first in our work, in part because they've got a big CDBG CARES chunk of money that they're going to be able to utilize. And I would say they're on a fast track. And even with that fast track, we are forecasting that we're not going to be able to put the first dollars out until July 1st. So just given, that it has to go to city council and then it is going to be advertised for 2 weeks, then we're going to conduct a lottery. Then we're going to do income eligibility application review for the potentially hundreds of applicants. July 1 is our target start date for the city of Newton.
Okay, thank you. If a Raft recipient has gotten funds for non-rental assistance in the past, can they still be eligible for rental assistance from Raft?
I think what we're going to be focusing on is, are they currently receiving assistance? So
Okay.
if they are currently receiving assistance, then no, they won't be eligible for this round of rental assistance. But if their Raft ends next month, they could apply later.
Okay.
Which actually that might be an important point. So we're going to be advertising the program for 2 weeks and then conducting a lottery. But people can still apply, and they will just get added to the bottom of the wait list in the order received. And that way, we can kind of keep a pretty good list of demand as that demand maybe shifts over time.
Okay. And I have a question about how you're going to do the lottery. I don't know if you can go into that quickly, how you plan to do that.
MHP does a great training on how to administer lotteries.
Great.
Yeah, there's no short answer, sorry.
Okay.
We're not doing a lottery between now and 2 or 3 weeks or a month.
Okay. A quick question on CPA usage. Can it be used to fund shelters?
Yeah, I replied privately to that person, or maybe to the whole group. But in any case, CPA is a program that deals with housing units, so apartments, rentals, and home ownership. So it was not set up as a program that deals with temporary housing. That's really more like a social services program, and CPA really is a housing program for permanent units.
And I know, Stuart, you've been responding to some folks when they've been asking questions privately, but just wanted to answer a couple or put out a couple questions for folks who are on the phone or who haven't been able to see that chat. So there's a question about how communities can access CPA funds if they don't have a municipal Housing Trust. Can you go into that? And also, can CPA funds be used to reimburse a municipality for expenses incurred?
Yep. So CPA works really well with Municipal Affordable Housing Trust, which is why we see so many communities having both, but there is no requirement to have a Municipal Affordable Housing Trust to use CPA housing money. Folks can apply directly to a community preservation committee, and then that appropriation goes to the city council for them to vote on, and then the money can be used directly. So that's certainly the original model of CPA, is that the money flows directly to the project. But when the state created Municipal Affordable Housing Trust back in 2006, one of the huge benefits of it is a Municipal Affordable Housing Trust can move quickly if the money is sitting in their trust. They don't have to wait for town meetings. So, many communities have realized that it can be beneficial to have a trust and then to appropriate CPA money into the trust. And then it does not require any further vote to use that funding. So that's one of the benefits of putting money in the trust. But in this situation, if the money's not already in the trust, folks can apply directly to a CPC and have that money directly appropriated to the program. So it can go either way, but they work very nicely in concert with each other.
And that doesn't have to be a non-municipal body, am I correct?
That's correct. So there's, again, no requirement on who can apply for CPA funds. So when the money is appropriated, it can go to the city's housing department, who can run the program. A municipality, again, can't use administrative funds to pay their staff because that's supplanting. But the money can certainly be appropriated to a city to run a program, and they in turn can then turn to a nonprofit or a CDC or someone else to run the program, which most cities do turn to someone else to actually run it.
Is there any way folks could protect against future evictions after use of CPA for rental payments? Is anyone including that kind of language in their agreements for assistance?
We are not.
Okay.
In Salem, we were planning on including something in the agreement that the landlord has to agree that they won't charge late fees and that sort of thing. The governor's new legislation helps with the eviction process, so we're really excited about that.
Great, thank you.
Dana, if I could just add that some communities have trouble, believe it or not, getting landlords to participate. So I would caution folks to not layer too many requirements onto the landlord because you may not be able to get them to participate.
Okay, interesting. We only have a couple minutes left. I'm looking, we do have a lot of questions about CDBG funds and how to use CDBG, ESG, FEMA funds. Eric, do you want to mention just quickly there's some guidance on that as well?
And we're still working through all of the CARES Act related guidance, but as part of the CARES Act, there have been certain waivers of flexibility granted to CDBG and ESG funding that would allow some more flexibility than usual with the funds. Unfortunately, I can't speak on that too specifically right now, but we're working to post that on our website of all those different waivers and flexibilities that have been granted for those resources.
Okay, great. What about communities that don't have CPA or a trust or CDBG funds? What are folks hearing for those communities?
So I will just bring up that our state housing agency, DHCD, is receiving additional CDBG CARES funds. And I believe that some are on the call listening to this conversation and listening to the questions. And as they're considering how to direct these additional funds. And there may be a possibility of some of these funds going toward rent assistance. And there may be the possibility that it can give consideration to the communities that don't have the same kind of local resources and that are not entitlement communities. So that's a potential possibility moving forward for some of our smaller communities.
Okay. I'm sorry that we are not going to get to every question. I hope that we covered most of them, or as many of them as we could. We are taking notes. We will be sharing materials from all of these programs, resources, links, contact information for all of the speakers as well. Before we leave, any last words from any of the speakers as well?
I just want to say again that we are going to be saving all these questions, reviewing them, and putting together some sort of response that we'll get out widely, because we do want to make sure that we're hearing you and trying to give as best good answers as we can. Thanks for being here.
And a reminder, I know folks have been asking if there will be an inventory of these programs. We are working with our partners at DHCD to come up with that as well. So don't hesitate to reach out to us with questions. Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our speakers, and thank you to all of you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.